The scorching desert sun beat down mercilessly as Staff Sergeant Morgan Reid wiped sweat from her brow, peering through her scope at the distant ridgeline. 89 hostile combatants had her unit pinned down in what was supposed to be a routine patrol, now turned into a desperate fight for survival. The Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle beside her represented their last hope, a weapon she'd spent years mastering, though none of her squad knew the full extent of her training, or the legendary mentor who had shaped her into the warrior they were about to witness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The mission had started like any other, a 12-person reconnaissance team deployed to gather intelligence on insurgent movements in the mountainous border region. Staff Sergeant Morgan Reid had been assigned as their designated marksman, though most of the team viewed her appointment with thinly veiled skepticism. Captain James Hartwell, the team leader, had made his position abundantly clear during their pre-mission briefing. "Reid," he'd said, his voice carrying that familiar edge of doubt she'd grown accustomed to hearing, "you'll provide overwatch from the ridge. Try not to miss if things go south." The comment had drawn snickers from several team members. Morgan had simply nodded, maintaining her composure as she'd done countless times before. After 8 years of military service, she'd learned that responding to such remarks only provided more ammunition for those determined to undermine her. Instead, she focused on mentally reviewing the terrain maps, calculating wind variables, and preparing herself for any contingency. What Hartwell and the others didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that Morgan Reid wasn't just another soldier who'd completed basic sniper training. Her story ran much deeper, connected to one of the most decorated long-range specialists in military history. A connection she'd kept hidden, determined to prove herself on her own merits rather than through family legacy. The patrol had moved through the valley floor while Morgan maintained her position on the overlooking ridge. Through her scope, she observed the team's progress, occasionally scanning the surrounding mountains for any sign of threat. The radio chatter was minimal, professional, until Private Santiago's voice crackled through with unmistakable tension. "Movement, North Ridge, multiple personnel." His words were clipped, controlled, but Morgan could hear the underlying concern. "How many?" Hartwell demanded. "I count at least 15. "Wait." Santiago's voice faltered. "Captain, we've got a serious problem." "There's a lot more than 15. Morgan adjusted her scope, focusing on the northern ridge. What she saw sent ice through her veins. Not 15 hostiles. Not 20. Dozens of armed fighters were moving into strategic positions around the valley, effectively surrounding the patrol. She counted quickly, 40, 50, 60, still more appearing from concealed positions. Their team was being drawn into a carefully orchestrated ambush. "Captain," Morgan radioed, her voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "I'm counting 89 hostiles deploying into attack positions. You're about to be surrounded." 89. Hartwell's disbelief was evident. "That's impossible." "You're miscounting, Reid." Before Morgan could respond, the first shots rang out. The patrol scrambled for cover as bullets kicked up dust around them. Within seconds, the sporadic fire evolved into a coordinated assault, pinning the team in a shallow depression with limited protection and no clear escape route. "Taking fire from all sides!" Sergeant Walker shouted through the radio. "We need immediate air support!" Captain Hartwell's voice cut through the chaos. "Negative on air support. Command says nearest assets are 40 minutes out. We're on our own." Morgan watched through her scope as the situation deteriorated rapidly. 3 team members were already wounded, being dragged to whatever meager cover was available. The hostiles were tightening their perimeter, methodically eliminating any chance for escape. At this rate, the entire patrol would be overrun within 20 minutes. She made her decision instantly, reaching for her pack and retrieving the disassembled components of her Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle. The massive weapon wasn't standard issue for reconnaissance operations, but Morgan had insisted on bringing it as a contingency, a decision that now stood between her team and annihilation. As she assembled the rifle with practiced precision, Morgan's mind flashed back to the countless hours spent under her mentor's watchful eye. The way he drilled her relentlessly on assembling and disassembling the Barrett blindfolded. How he'd taught her to calculate complex ballistic equations in her head while under physical stress. The endless drills that had seemed excessive, even brutal at times, but had forged her into something exceptional. "You're not training to be good, Morgan," he'd told her. "You're training to be impossible." The Barrett came together in her hands, each component locking into place with satisfying precision. She positioned herself at the edge of the ridge, establishing a stable firing platform and loading the first Blas .50 caliber round into the chamber. The weapon was massive, designed to disable vehicles and penetrate light armor. In Morgan's hands, it was about to become something else entirely, a force of nature. Through her scope, she identified the hostile commanders, 3 men coordinating the attack from a position of relative safety. Take out the leadership first, then create chaos. Her mentor's voice echoed in her memory as clearly as if he were lying beside her. Without leadership, an attack formation becomes a mob. Morgan inhaled deeply, allowing her heart rate to slow. She felt the familiar calm settling over her, the hyper-focused state where external distractions faded away and only the target remained. Time seemed to stretch as she exhaled gradually, squeezing the trigger with deliberate pressure. The Barrett roared, its massive recoil absorbed by Morgan's perfectly positioned body. 800 meters away, the first commander dropped. Before the others could react, Morgan had already chambered another round, acquired her second target, and fired again. 2 down. The third commander was already moving, realizing the danger too late. Morgan tracked his movement, calculating lead and elevation adjustments instantaneously. The Barrett thundered once more. 3 commanders eliminated in less than 15 seconds. Over the radio, she could hear the patrol's confusion as the enemy attack suddenly lost cohesion. "What the hell just happened?" someone asked. "Reid?" Captain Hartwell's voice crackled through. "Was that you?" Morgan didn't respond. She was already shifting her focus to the heavy weapons teams that posed the greatest threat to the patrol. 2 fighters were setting up a mortar position that would rain death on her trapped teammates. The Barrett spoke twice more, and the mortar teams ceased to exist. On the valley floor, the patrol began to notice a pattern. Every time they were about to be overrun from a particular direction, the attacking fighters would suddenly drop or scatter in disarray. The Barrett's distinctive report echoed through the mountains as Morgan methodically eliminated critical threats one after another. "Jesus Christ!" Walker's voice came through the radio. "Reid's picking them apart. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. The hostile force began to realize they were being decimated by a single sniper. Several fighters attempted to locate Morgan's position, firing blindly toward the ridge. She remained disciplined, changing positions after every few shots, just as she'd been taught. Never fire more than 3 rounds from the same location. Movement is life. 20 minutes into the engagement, Morgan had eliminated 23 key targets: commanders, heavy weapons operators, and fighters attempting to flank the patrol. The once coordinated attack had devolved into chaos, with the remaining hostiles either retreating or firing ineffectively from increasingly defensive positions. Captain Hartwell seized the opportunity, reorganizing the patrol into a fighting formation that began to push back against their attackers. "Reid," he radioed, his voice carrying a newfound respect. "We're moving to break contact. Cover our southwestern approach." "Acknowledged," Morgan replied, shifting her position to support the patrol's movement. As the team began their tactical withdrawal, she laid down precise suppressive fire that kept the enemy pinned and unable to regroup. The Barrett's magazine ran empty, and Morgan reloaded with practiced efficiency. The weapon's weight and recoil would have exhausted most soldiers, but she showed no signs of fatigue. Her breathing remained controlled, her shots devastating in their accuracy. This wasn't just training or talent. This was mastery born from thousands of hours of practice under the most demanding mentor imaginable. 90 minutes after the ambush began, the patrol had successfully broken contact and reached a defensible position where evacuation was possible. Of the 89 hostiles who had initiated the attack, 37 had been confirmed eliminated, 29 by Morgan's Barrett alone. The remainder had either retreated or were too disorganized to continue their pursuit. As the evacuation helicopters approached, Captain Hartwell radioed one final instruction to Morgan. "Reid, exfil to our position. Mission complete." Morgan packed her rifle with the same methodical precision she applied to everything. As she made her way down from the ridge to rejoin the patrol, she knew something fundamental had changed. The dubious looks and snide remarks would stop. The questions about her qualification would cease. In their place would be a new question. How had Staff Sergeant Morgan Reid become capable of such extraordinary marksmanship? It was a question she'd been avoiding for years, but perhaps it was finally time to reveal the truth about her training and the legendary sniper who had shaped her into the warrior she'd become. The evacuation site buzzed with activity as medics attended to the wounded and the remaining team members secured the perimeter. Morgan arrived just as the helicopters touched down, dust swirling around her as she approached Captain Hartwell. His expression had transformed completely, the dismissive skepticism replaced by something that looked remarkably like awe. "Reid," he said, raising his voice over the rotor noise. "That was the most extraordinary display of marksmanship I've ever witnessed. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Morgan adjusted the Barrett's case on her shoulder. "That's a long story, Captain. I think we've all earned the right to hear it," he replied, gesturing toward the team members who were watching their exchange with undisguised curiosity. As they boarded the helicopters, Morgan knew her secret was about to become very public. The legacy she'd hidden for so long, both a burden and a gift, would no longer remain in the shadows. In some ways, it was a relief. In others, it meant confronting memories she'd kept carefully contained. The helicopters lifted off, carrying them away from the battlefield where Morgan Reid had single-handedly changed the course of an impossible situation. As the mountains receded beneath them, she felt a chapter closing and another beginning. The Barrett .50 caliber had done more than save their lives. It had revealed her true identity as the heir to a sniper legacy few could comprehend. And as the team looked at her with newfound respect, Morgan realized that sometimes the greatest battles weren't fought against external enemies, but against the doubts that others placed within us. Today she had won both wars with a precision that would soon become legendary in its own right. What no one in that helicopter could possibly know was that Morgan's story was just beginning, and the full extent of her capabilities had yet to be revealed. The Barrett had changed everything, but the woman behind the weapon would go on to transform warfare itself. High above the desert battlefield, Staff Sergeant Morgan Reid looked out the helicopter window and allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. A true warrior's greatest weapon isn't in their hands, it's in their heart. Today, she had proven him right in more ways than anyone could imagine. The helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, rotors slowly winding down as medical teams rushed forward to attend to the wounded. Morgan Reid stepped onto the tarmac, the Barrett's case a familiar weight against her shoulder. Unlike her teammates, who moved with evident exhaustion, she carried herself with the composed discipline of someone who'd trained for far worse conditions than they'd just survived. Captain Hartwell approached as she secured her equipment. "Command wants a full debrief. Now." His tone had changed, the condescension replaced by something resembling respect. "They're having trouble believing the casualty numbers we reported." Morgan nodded. "I'll clean up and be there in 15. "No," Hartwell said, shaking his head. "They want you exactly as you are. Battle dirt and all. The base commander himself is waiting." The scorching desert sun beat down mercilessly as Staff Sergeant Morgan Reid wiped sweat from her brow, peering through her scope at the distant ridgeline. 89 hostile combatants had her unit pinned down in what was supposed to be a routine patrol, now turned into a desperate fight for survival. The Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle beside her represented their last hope, a weapon she'd spent years mastering, though none of her squad knew the full extent of her training, or the legendary mentor who had shaped her into the warrior they were about to witness. The command center hummed with tense energy as Morgan entered. 3 senior officers sat behind a table reviewing after-action reports, while digital maps displayed the battle zone on wall-mounted screens. Behind them stood a figure in civilian clothes, a man with silver hair and watchful eyes that missed nothing. Morgan recognized him immediately, but betrayed no reaction. Colonel Westbrook, the base commander, looked up from his tablet. Staff Sergeant Reid, please explain how one soldier with a Barrett .50 caliber managed to neutralize 29 high-value targets in a 90-minute engagement. Morgan stood at attention. Sir, I identified command elements and heavy weapons operators as priority targets, then systematically eliminated them to disrupt enemy coordination. We understand the strategy, Westbrook said, leaning forward. What we're having difficulty comprehending is the execution. These shots were taken at distances between 800 and 200 meters, in variable wind conditions, against moving targets, with 0 misses reported. That's beyond exceptional. It borders on impossible. The silver-haired civilian stepped forward. Perhaps Staff Sergeant Reid would be more comfortable explaining if we cleared the room of non-essential personnel. His voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Colonel Westbrook hesitated, then nodded to his staff. Everyone out except senior officers. As the room emptied, Morgan maintained her rigid posture, eyes fixed forward. Only when the door closed did the civilian approach her. "You've been keeping secrets, Staff Sergeant," he said, studying her face with an evaluative gaze. "Though I suppose that runs in the family." Colonel Westbrook looked between them, confusion evident. "You know each other?" The civilian nodded. Staff Sergeant Reid is the granddaughter of Master Sergeant William Reid, the most accomplished long-range specialist in military history. 30 years ago, I served with him in operations that remain classified to this day. He extended his hand to Morgan. "Thomas Blackwood. Your grandfather saved my life more times than I care to remember." Morgan shook his hand, finally allowing her composure to slip slightly. "He spoke of you often, sir." Blackwood turned to the officers. "What you witnessed today wasn't luck or even natural talent. It was the result of the most rigorous training program ever developed for precision marksmanship, a program that officially doesn't exist." Colonel Westbrook's expression darkened. "Why wasn't I informed that we had an operator of this caliber under my command?" "Because Staff Sergeant Reid wasn't supposed to be here," Blackwood replied. "She was meant to join a specialized unit after completing her current deployment. Her assignment to a standard reconnaissance team was an administrative oversight." Morgan remained silent, though internally she knew this was far from the truth. There had been no oversight. She had deliberately requested standard deployment, determined to prove herself through regular channels rather than through her grandfather's connections. It was a decision that had initially frustrated Blackwood and others involved in the specialized program. "Well, that oversight nearly got 12 good soldiers killed," Westbrook said sharply. "And then it saved them." He turned to Morgan. "I want the full story, Staff Sergeant. No more secrets." Morgan took a deep breath. It was time to reveal what she'd kept hidden for so long. "My grandfather began training me when I was 8 years old," she began, her voice steady and controlled. "Not with weapons initially, but with the fundamentals, breathing control, patience, mathematical calculations for ballistics. By 12, I could calculate windage and elevation adjustments in my head faster than most adults could with a computer." William believed that exceptional marksmanship wasn't about natural talent, Blackwood interjected. It was about programming the mind and body through thousands of hours of perfect practice. He developed training methods that pushed beyond conventional limits. Morgan nodded. "When other kids were playing video games, I was spending weekends in all weather conditions, learning to read terrain, wind patterns, mirage effects. My grandfather would create challenges that seemed impossible, hitting targets while physically exhausted, solving complex ballistic problems under stress, assembling weapons blindfolded." The officers exchanged glances, clearly reassessing everything they thought they knew about the quiet staff sergeant who had always performed well but never called attention to herself. "By 16, Morgan continued, I could consistently hit targets at distances that most military snipers consider at the edge of their capabilities. My grandfather had connections that allowed me to train with specialized equipment not available to civilians. The Barrett .50 caliber became my primary platform because of its versatility and stopping power." "And when William passed away 5 years ago," Blackwood added, "he left detailed training regimens and journals documenting Morgan's progress. He believed she had the potential to surpass even his achievements. Colonel Westbrook leaned back in his chair, processing this information. So you've essentially been training as an elite sniper since childhood, yet you never mentioned this during your enlistment or subsequent assignments. No, sir, Morgan acknowledged. I wanted to earn my position through demonstrated performance, not family connections. My grandfather taught me that true respect is earned, never given. Blackwood smiled slightly. That sounds exactly like William. He turned to the colonel. What happened today was no fluke. Staff Sergeant Reid has been operating at a fraction of her capability to avoid drawing attention. But when her team's survival was at stake, she reverted to her actual training level. The officers deliberated quietly among themselves before Colonel Westbrook addressed Morgan again. Staff Sergeant Reid, I'm reassigning you effective immediately. Mr. Blackwood here represents a joint special operations task force that has apparently been waiting for you to finish playing soldier. His tone carried a hint of reproach. You'll report to him for your new assignment. Morgan tensed visibly. Sir, with respect, I'd prefer to remain with my current unit. That's not an option, Westbrook replied firmly. Your skills are being wasted in conventional operations. The incident today made that abundantly clear. Blackwood stepped closer to Morgan. Your grandfather always said you were stubborn, he said quietly. But even he knew there comes a time when exceptional people must accept exceptional responsibilities. 3 hours later, Morgan found herself in a secure briefing room with Blackwood and 2 operators she didn't recognize, a man and woman wearing nondescript tactical gear without insignia or rank. Staff Sergeant Reid, meet operators Kane and Winters, Blackwood said. They're part of Task Force Spectre, a multi-branch unit specializing in high-value target interdiction. Kane, a compact man with watchful eyes, nodded respectfully. Your grandfather was a legend in our community. When we heard his protege was finally joining us, we volunteered to assist with your transition. Winters, the woman, studied Morgan with clinical interest. 89 hostiles, 29 confirmed eliminations with 0 misses. If even half the reports are accurate, you're exactly what we've been looking for. Morgan remained reserved, assessing these strangers who spoke of her grandfather with such familiarity. I wasn't aware I'd been looked for. Blackwood activated a digital display on the wall. Your grandfather didn't just train you to be an exceptional shot, Morgan. He was preparing you for this. A satellite image appeared, showing a compound nestled in mountainous terrain. 3 weeks ago, intelligence identified this location as the headquarters of the same network that orchestrated today's ambush. We've been monitoring it for months, Kane explained. They're planning something significant, multiple coordinated attacks across 3 countries. The leadership element is highly mobile, heavily protected, and nearly impossible to approach undetected. Nearly impossible, Winters emphasized, except for someone with your particular skill set. Morgan studied the compound's layout, instinctively identifying firing positions, calculating distances and angles. You want me to eliminate high-value targets from extreme range? Not just extreme range, Blackwood said. We're talking about shots that push beyond what most consider possible. 500 meters minimum in mountain conditions against a security-conscious adversary. Morgan felt her pulse quicken slightly. Even with her extensive training, shots at that distance represented the very edge of human capability. My grandfather used to say that at extreme distances, you're no longer shooting at where the target is. You're shooting at where physics says it must be. Exactly, Blackwood nodded. And that's why we need someone who doesn't just understand the mathematics and mechanics, but has internalized them to the point where calculation becomes instinct. Kane pulled up additional satellite imagery. Standard sniper doctrine would put this operation beyond acceptable parameters. The variables are too numerous, the margin for error too small, but your grandfather's journals suggest you've been training for precisely these conditions. Morgan remained silent, weighing her options. Part of her still resisted the idea of leveraging her grandfather's connections rather than making her own way. Yet she couldn't deny the reality. Conventional units would never utilize her full capabilities, and lives would be lost that she could otherwise save. When would this operation begin? She finally asked. Training starts tomorrow, Blackwood replied. Deployment in 14 days, assuming you can demonstrate the necessary proficiency. Morgan almost laughed. 14 days to prepare for what might be the most challenging shot in military history? Is that a problem? Winters asked, her expression unreadable. Morgan thought of her grandfather's relentless training regimen, the thousands of hours spent honing skills that most people couldn't comprehend. No, she said finally. It's not a problem. Blackwood smiled, and for a moment Morgan caught a glimpse of the young soldier her grandfather had once saved. William always said you'd surpass him when you finally stopped holding yourself back. I think it's time we find out if he was right. The next morning, Morgan reported to a remote section of the base where a specialized training facility had been established overnight. The range extended into the desert, with targets positioned at incrementally greater distances, 1,000 meters, 500 meters, 2,000 meters, and beyond. Kane waited for her, standing beside a weapons case. Your standard Barrett is excellent for distances up to about 800 meters, he said without preamble. Beyond that, we need something more specialized. He opened the case to reveal a custom-built rifle system unlike anything Morgan had ever seen. XM500 prototype with advanced ballistic computer integration, carbon nanotube barrel reinforcement, and recoil mitigation that's still classified. Only 3 exist in the world. Morgan lifted the weapon, feeling its perfect balance. My grandfather designed this, didn't he? Kane looked surprised. How did you know? The cheek weld, the trigger position. It's exactly what he always talked about creating. His ideal system. Morgan ran her hand along the barrel. He never lived to see it completed. No, Kane acknowledged, but he made sure you'd be the one to use it. For the next week, Morgan trained with an intensity that astonished even the veteran operators of Task Force Spectre. 16-hour days spent mastering the new weapon system, calculating ballistic solutions for shots most snipers would consider theoretical rather than practical. She pushed herself beyond exhaustion, beyond pain, driven by a determination that seemed to transcend normal human limits. What surprised the team most wasn't her technical proficiency, impressive as it was, but her intuitive understanding of factors that couldn't be mathematically calculated. The way she could sense subtle air density changes before instruments detected them. How she adjusted for mirage effects that others couldn't even perceive. On the 7th day, Blackwood called for a full capability assessment. The target was positioned at 600 meters, well beyond what military doctrine considered the effective range of any sniper system. Variable winds gusted across the range, and heat mirage distorted the target area. Morgan set up her position methodically, running through her grandfather's mental checklist: equipment verification, environmental assessment, internal calibration. As she settled behind the rifle, the world around her seemed to slow and clarify. Her awareness extended outward, absorbing every relevant detail while filtering out distractions. The shot she was about to attempt violated conventional wisdom about ballistic possibilities. At this distance, the bullet would drop nearly 40 feet during its flight, which would last over 3 seconds. Within that time, wind conditions could change multiple times. The rotation of the Earth itself became a calculable factor. Whenever you're ready, Blackwood said quietly, standing well back from her position. Morgan didn't acknowledge him. Her focus had narrowed to the relationship between herself, the weapon, and the distant target. She controlled her breathing, allowing her heart rate to slow. 4 beats per minute, a meditative state her grandfather had taught her to achieve under any conditions. The crosshairs settled on a point seemingly disconnected from the target. A spot in empty air that physics dictated the bullet and target would simultaneously occupy if every calculation was perfect. She exhaled completely and became utterly still. The rifle fired, its report echoing across the desert. 3.5 seconds later, the bullet struck dead center. Blackwood lowered his binoculars, his expression revealing genuine awe. I've never seen anything like that, he said quietly. Not even from your grandfather. Morgan began breaking down her equipment with the same methodical precision she applied to everything. He always said the student should surpass the teacher. You understand what this means, Blackwood continued. What you just did, it changes everything we thought was possible. Morgan looked up at him, her eyes reflecting a certainty that came from absolute mastery of her craft. My grandfather didn't train me to change what's possible, she said. "He trained me to redefine it." 7 days later, a stealth helicopter deposited Morgan and a minimal support team in a remote mountain range, thousands of miles from FOB Sentinel. The mission parameters were straightforward but daunting. Eliminate 5 high-value targets within a 60-second window to prevent any possibility of escape or retaliation. The compound lay in a valley 700 meters from the only viable firing position, a narrow ledge halfway up an opposing mountain face. Between her position and the target, complex wind patterns swirled through the valley, creating ballistic conditions that would render conventional sniping impossible. For 3 days, Morgan observed the compound through her scope, memorizing patterns of movement, documenting wind behavior at different times of day, making infinitesimal adjustments to her firing solution. The operation hinged entirely on her ability to execute 5 consecutive shots at a distance most snipers would consider theoretical rather than practical. On the 4th morning, intelligence confirmed all 5 targets would be present for a leadership meeting at precisely 0600 hours. It would be their only opportunity. As dawn broke over the mountains, Morgan lay perfectly still behind her rifle, the XM500 prototype becoming an extension of her body. Her spotter, Operator Winters, monitored environmental conditions and maintained communication with the extraction team. Wind shifting at the valley entrance. Winters murmured. Temperature gradient steepening. Morgan made microscopic adjustments to her scope, incorporating the new variables into her firing solution. The distance between success and failure was measured in fractions of a millimeter at this range. 5 minutes to target appearance, Winters reported. Morgan's mind was utterly calm, focused with laser precision on the task ahead. This was what her grandfather had prepared her for, not just the technical skills, but the mental discipline to execute under conditions where success seemed mathematically impossible. First target visible, Winters said quietly. Second target following. Third. Fourth. Confirmation on all 5 targets in the courtyard. Morgan's world narrowed to her breathing, her trigger finger, and the complex physics problem unfolding through her scope. Time seemed to slow as she entered the hyper-focused state her grandfather had taught her to achieve. A zone where conscious thought gave way to perfected instinct. "Whenever you're ready," Winters whispered. Morgan didn't respond. Her concentration was absolute. Her awareness extended to encompass every factor that would influence the bullet's 3-second journey. She exhaled completely and became utterly still. The Barrett fired 5 times in rapid succession, each shot perfectly controlled despite the massive recoil. Through her scope, Morgan watched as the impossible became reality. 5 targets eliminated with 5 shots at a distance that redefined the boundaries of human capability. The extraction helicopter appeared exactly 17 minutes later, hovering just long enough for Morgan and Winters to board before disappearing back into the mountain mist. As they lifted away from the operation zone, Winters finally broke her professional demeanor. "I've worked with the best snipers in the world," she said, genuine amazement in her voice. "What you just did wasn't supposed to be possible." Morgan secured her rifle case, her movements efficient and precise. "My grandfather used to say that limits exist primarily in our minds. Exceed them there first, and reality will follow." Back at the Secure Operations Center, Blackwood reviewed the mission footage with Morgan and the senior leadership of Task Force Spectre. The room was unusually quiet, the typical post-operation banter absent as they watched the recorded shots from multiple angles. 5 targets, 5 shots, 700 meters, variable conditions, Blackwood summarized, his voice carrying a rare note of genuine respect. "The operation has disrupted the entire hostile network. Intelligence estimates it will take them months to reorganize, if they can do so at all." Morgan sat quietly, neither celebrating nor seeking validation. Her grandfather had taught her that true excellence needed no external acknowledgement. It was its own reward. "Staff Sergeant Reid," the task force commander said, breaking the silence. "It appears we need to reevaluate our understanding of operational parameters. What you've demonstrated changes our strategic options significantly." Morgan looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Sir, what I demonstrated isn't something that can be easily replicated or taught. My grandfather spent a lifetime developing these methods, and I spent 20 years learning them." "Which is precisely why your next assignment is so important," Blackwood interjected. "William Reed's training program died with him, except for what exists in your mind and muscle memory. The commander nodded. "We're establishing a specialized training cadre with you as the primary instructor. Your mission is no longer just about eliminating targets. It's about creating the next generation of operators capable of what we witnessed today." Morgan felt a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in having honored her grandfather's legacy, vindication after years of concealing her true capabilities, but also a sobering recognition of the responsibility being placed on her shoulders. "My grandfather used to say that a true master's greatest achievement isn't what they accomplish themselves," she said finally. "It's what they enable others to accomplish after them." Blackwood smiled. "He would be proud of you, Morgan, not just of your skill, but of who you've become." As the briefing concluded, Morgan found herself alone with the prototype rifle that had once existed only in her grandfather's imagination. She ran her hand along its barrel, remembering the countless hours they'd spent together, the relentless training, the philosophical discussions about the nature of mastery, the moments of frustration and breakthrough. The Barrett .50 caliber had changed everything today, just as it had on that fateful day in the desert when her team faced impossible odds. But the true game-changer wasn't the weapon itself. It was the person behind it, shaped by decades of preparation for a moment no one else had foreseen. Morgan Reid had redefined what was possible, and in doing so, had finally stepped fully into the legacy her grandfather had prepared for her. The journey ahead would be challenging in entirely new ways, but she faced it with the quiet confidence of someone who had discovered their true purpose. The Barrett had been the instrument, but the transformation had come from within. The scorching desert sun beat down mercilessly as Staff Sergeant Morgan Reid wiped sweat from her brow, peering through her scope at the distant ridgeline. 89 hostile combatants had her unit pinned down in what was supposed to be a routine patrol, now turned into a desperate fight for survival. The Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle beside her represented their last hope, a weapon she'd spent years mastering, though none of her squad knew the full extent of her training, or the legendary mentor who had shaped her into the warrior they were about to witness. 6 months into her role as lead instructor for Task Force Spectre's specialized sniper program, Morgan Reid stood before a class of 12 candidates, the most promising marksmen from every branch of the military. Each had arrived with impressive credentials and combat experience. Each believed they understood the limits of long-range precision shooting, and each was about to discover how little they actually knew. "Everything you've been taught about extreme distance shooting is based on conventional wisdom," Morgan began, her voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute mastery. "Today, we begin dismantling that wisdom and replacing it with something more valuable, unconventional truth." The training facility had been constructed according to Morgan's exacting specifications, a complex that combined traditional shooting ranges with environmental simulation chambers, advanced ballistics laboratories, and psychological conditioning spaces. Nothing like it had ever existed before, just as no training program had ever attempted what Morgan was about to undertake. "The Barrett .50 caliber is an exceptional weapon," she continued, gesturing to the rifles positioned at each station. "But it's merely a tool. The true weapon system consists of your mind, your body, and your understanding of physics. We're not here to make you good shots. We're here to transform you into something beyond the current definition of possible." Among the candidates, Morgan had already identified 3 with exceptional potential. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Cortez from Naval Special Warfare had natural spatial awareness that surpassed even Morgan's at a similar stage of development. Master Sergeant Jackson Turner possessed an intuitive understanding of environmental factors that couldn't be taught. And Sergeant First Class Michael Chen demonstrated computational abilities that allowed him to solve complex ballistic equations almost instantaneously. What none of them possessed, yet, was the integrated mastery that Morgan's grandfather had instilled in her through decades of relentless training. The ability to synthesize technical skill, physical control, and intuitive understanding into a unified capability that transcended conventional limits. "For the next 16 weeks, you will be pushed beyond what you believe possible," Morgan explained. "Most of you will fail. Some will quit. A few may succeed in ways that redefine what we consider achievable in modern warfare." Behind her, the main screen displayed satellite imagery of mountain ranges, urban environments, and desert expanses, each representing operational theaters where impossible shots had determined the outcome of critical missions. "The program consists of 4 phases," Morgan continued: technical mastery, physical conditioning, environmental adaptation, and psychological integration. You will not advance to the next phase until you've demonstrated complete proficiency in the current one. Questions? Lieutenant Commander Cortez raised her hand. With respect, Staff Sergeant, the shot distances you're describing violate established ballistic principles. Even accounting for advanced weapon systems, there are physical limitations that can't be overcome. Morgan nodded, having expected this response. 6 months ago, I eliminated 5 high-value targets at 700 meters in variable mountain conditions with 5 consecutive shots. According to established ballistic principles, what I did was impossible. She let that statement hang in the air before continuing. Your first lesson begins now. The difference between theoretical limitations and practical achievements is often just a matter of perspective. The first phase of training tested technical proficiency beyond anything the candidates had previously experienced. Morgan drilled them relentlessly on weapon mechanics, ballistic calculations, and precision adjustments. They practiced assembling and disassembling their rifles blindfolded, calibrating scopes under extreme time pressure, and calculating firing solutions with intentionally limited information. 3 candidates washed out within the first 2 weeks, unable to meet Morgan's exacting standards. The remaining 9 progressed to increasingly challenging scenarios, each designed to push the boundaries of conventional marksmanship. You're still thinking like traditional snipers, Morgan observed during a particularly frustrating session where none of the candidates had successfully engaged targets beyond 800 meters. You're calculating bullet drop, windage, and atmospheric resistance as separate problems. They're not. They're aspects of a single, unified physics problem. She stepped to the firing line, taking position behind one of the Barrett rifles. Watch. Without using spotting equipment or spending time on calculations, Morgan fired 3 consecutive shots at a target 100 meters distant. Each bullet struck within centimeters of the others, forming a tight group that seemed to defy probability. How did you calculate that so quickly? Sergeant Chen asked, his expertise in mathematics making him particularly curious about her methods. I didn't calculate it, Morgan replied. At least, not in the way you're thinking. She tapped her temple. After enough perfect practice, the calculations become intuitive. Not conscious mathematics, but embodied understanding. Your brain processes the variables automatically, like catching a ball without calculating its trajectory. The second phase focused on physical conditioning, but not in ways the candidates expected. Rather than emphasizing strength or endurance in conventional terms, Morgan's program centered on proprioception, breath control, and micromuscle management. Your heartbeat affects your shot, she explained during an advanced biofeedback session. Most marksmen try to time their shots between heartbeats. We're going to take a different approach, learning to control your heartbeat itself. Using techniques her grandfather had adapted from both military special operations and Eastern meditative practices, Morgan taught the candidates to slow their heart rates to 4 beats per minute while maintaining complete situational awareness. They practiced shooting while connected to biometric monitors, learning to maintain perfect stillness despite physical stress. During one particularly grueling exercise, the candidates were required to hold firing positions for 6 hours, without shifting, their rifles trained on distant targets that would appear randomly for less than 2 seconds. Any movement meant failure. Master Sergeant Turner was the only candidate to complete the exercise successfully. How did you maintain position for so long? Morgan asked him afterward. I stopped thinking of myself as separate from the rifle, he replied. It wasn't about fighting the discomfort. It was about redefining my understanding of where my body ended and the weapon began. Morgan nodded, recognizing the breakthrough. That's exactly right. Exceptional marksmanship isn't about dominating the tool or the environment, it's about integration with them. By the 8th week, the class had been reduced to 6 candidates. Each had demonstrated remarkable progress, achieving accuracy at distances that would have seemed impossible when they began. But Morgan's standards continued to increase, pushing them toward capabilities that existed at the very edge of human potential. The third phase introduced environmental complexity beyond anything in conventional training. The specialized facility included wind tunnels, atmospheric pressure chambers, and terrain simulators that could replicate everything from Arctic conditions to tropical humidity. In real-world operations, you will never have perfect conditions, Morgan explained as the candidates entered a chamber where powerful fans created unpredictable wind patterns. So we're going to make these conditions as imperfect as possible. The exercise required engaging targets through constantly shifting wind currents while the temperature in the chamber fluctuated rapidly. To succeed, the candidates needed to sense minute atmospheric changes and adjust instantaneously, a skill that typically took years to develop. This is physically impossible, Lieutenant Commander Cortez protested after her third failed attempt. The wind patterns are changing faster than anyone could possibly calculate adjustments. Morgan approached her position. You're still trying to solve this mathematically, she observed. Stop calculating and start feeling. Feeling what, exactly? Cortez asked, frustration evident in her voice. The air moving across your skin. The subtle pressure changes against your face. The way light bends through different density gradients. Morgan positioned herself beside Cortez. Close your eyes. Cortez complied, skepticism clear in her expression. Now, without looking, tell me when the wind pattern shifts, Morgan instructed. For several moments, Cortez remained silent, her focus turning inward. Then suddenly, now. It just changed direction, from my right to slightly behind me. Morgan nodded. And again, now. More intense, coming directly from my left. Open your eyes, Morgan said. That's what you need to incorporate into your shooting. Not as separate information, but as part of your integrated awareness. Over the following weeks, the candidates learned to develop sensory acuity that bordered on preternatural. They practiced identifying wind shifts with their eyes closed, detecting temperature gradients through subtle air pressure changes against their skin, reading mirage effects that were nearly imperceptible to untrained observers. 4 candidates remained as they entered the final phase, psychological integration. This was where Morgan's grandfather's training methods diverged most dramatically from conventional approaches. It wasn't about stress inoculation or mental toughness in traditional military terms. It was about fundamentally rewiring the relationship between consciousness and action. The greatest limitation in extreme distance shooting isn't technical or physical, Morgan explained as they gathered in a darkened room filled with meditation cushions. It's psychological. The conscious mind introduces doubt, hesitation, and unnecessary complexity. Our goal is to access a different state of awareness, what my grandfather called the perfect shot mind. Using techniques drawn from diverse traditions, Morgan guided the candidates through exercises designed to achieve heightened focus while eliminating conscious interference. They practiced entering flow states on command, maintaining dual awareness of minute details and holistic patterns simultaneously, and executing complex actions without conscious calculation. When you achieve the perfect shot mind, Morgan told them, you don't take the shot takes itself. You become an observer of your own perfect execution. The training culminated in a final evaluation exercise that would test everything they had learned. The scenario: a simulated hostage rescue operation requiring precision shots at extreme distance through complex environmental conditions with zero margin for error. Lieutenant Commander Cortez, Master Sergeant Turner, Sergeant First Class Chen, and Captain Rodriguez, the 4 remaining candidates, would each attempt the scenario individually, with their performance determining their future role within Task Force Spectre. As Morgan observed from the control room, Blackwood joined her, watching the monitors with keen interest. Your grandfather would be amazed at what you've accomplished here, he said quietly. These 4 candidates are achieving results that would have been considered impossible 6 months ago. Morgan nodded, her focus on the screens displaying biometric data from each candidate. They've progressed faster than I expected, especially Cortez. Her intuitive understanding of environmental factors has developed remarkably. The question is whether any of them can replicate what you did in the mountains, Blackwood replied. That operation changed our strategic calculus entirely, if we can field even a handful of operators with similar capabilities. They're not there yet, Morgan interrupted, but they're closer than anyone has ever been. The evaluation began with Captain Rodriguez, who demonstrated excellent technical proficiency, but struggled with the psychological aspects, hesitating fractionally before critical shots. His final score placed him within the top percentile of conventional snipers, but fell short of the transformative standard Morgan had established. Sergeant Chen followed, his mathematical genius allowing him to calculate complex firing solutions with remarkable speed. Yet he too fell short in the integration phase, still treating the components as separate problems rather than a unified whole. Master Sergeant Turner's performance showed significant promise. His natural connection to environmental factors allowed him to adapt to changing conditions almost instinctively. He completed the scenario with impressive results, achieving accurate shots at distances that would qualify him for specialized operations. But it was Lieutenant Commander Cortez who demonstrated the breakthrough Morgan had been waiting for. As she progressed through the evaluation, her biometric readings showed something remarkable, a shift into the same physiological state that Morgan achieved during perfect execution. Her heartbeat slowed to 5 beats per minute. Her neural patterns displayed the characteristic signature of flow state combined with hyper-focused attention. When Cortez reached the final stage, a series of shots at targets 400 meters distant through variable wind conditions, she paused, closed her eyes briefly, then entered a state of absolute stillness. The shots that followed weren't just accurate. They demonstrated the same integrated mastery that had defined Morgan's legendary performance in the mountains. After the evaluation concluded, Morgan met with each candidate individually to discuss their results and future assignments. When Cortez entered the office, Morgan was reviewing the data from her performance. "You found it, didn't you?" Morgan asked without preamble. "The perfect shot, mind." Cortez nodded, a mixture of awe and uncertainty in her expression. "It was unlike anything I've ever experienced. Everything fell away. The calculations, the environmental factors, even my own body. There was just perfect alignment. That's what my grandfather spent his life trying to understand and teach," Morgan said. "The state where technical mastery, physical control, and intuitive understanding merge into something beyond conventional capability." "Can it be maintained?" Cortez asked. "Accessed reliably in actual operations?" "With proper training, yes." Morgan stood, walking to the window overlooking the training facility. "Which is why I'm recommending you for Phase 2 of the program." Cortez looked surprised. "There's a Phase 2? Morgan turned back to face her. "What we've done here is just the beginning. My grandfather's vision went far beyond creating exceptional individual operators. He believed this approach could fundamentally transform our understanding of human potential." 3 weeks later, Morgan stood before a classified briefing at Strategic Command Headquarters. Senior military leaders and intelligence officials had gathered to review the results of the specialized training program and its implications for future operations. "The data is clear," Morgan concluded after presenting the performance metrics from her candidates. "We've demonstrated that with proper selection and training, operators can consistently achieve accuracy at distances previously considered beyond human capability. The strategic implications are significant." The room remained silent as the assembled officials processed what they had witnessed. The ability to conduct precision operations at extreme standoff distances would fundamentally change risk calculations, force protection requirements, and operational planning parameters. General Maxwell, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, spoke first. "Staff Sergeant Reid, what you've accomplished is remarkable, but I have concerns about scalability. Can these methods be implemented broadly, or are we looking at a handful of exceptional operators?" "The training methodology can be standardized," Morgan replied. "But candidate selection is critical. We're looking for individuals with specific aptitudes that may not correlate with traditional marksmanship indicators." "And the psychological aspects? Ask the Director of Special Operations Command. Your report mentions altered states of consciousness and awareness that seem unorthodox for military applications." Morgan had anticipated this question. "Sir, what appears unorthodox is actually the application of well-established principles from diverse disciplines, sports psychology, meditative practices, and neurological research. We're not reinventing human capability. We're accessing potential that has always existed but remained largely untapped." After the briefing, Blackwood found Morgan in the corridor. "That went better than expected," he said. "They're approving full implementation and expanded facilities." Morgan nodded, relieved but not surprised. The results spoke for themselves. The program's graduates had demonstrated capabilities that transformed operational possibilities. "There's something else," Blackwood continued, lowering his voice. "Intelligence has identified a new threat, a network operating across multiple countries, coordinating attacks on civilian and military targets. We believe they're responsible for several recent mass casualty events. And? Morgan prompted, sensing there was more. Their leadership operates from locations specifically chosen to make conventional interdiction impossible. Extreme distances, complex terrain, civilian proximity. They believe themselves untouchable. Morgan understood immediately. You want me to lead an operation? Blackwood nodded. Not just any operation. This would be the first deployment of your full graduate team. Turner, Chen, Rodriguez, and Cortez coordinated with you as mission commander. 5 impossible shots, taken simultaneously from 5 different positions at 5 separate targets. The concept was unprecedented. Synchronized precision elimination across multiple locations, at distances beyond conventional capability, requiring perfect execution from an entire team rather than a single exceptional operator. When? Morgan asked simply. 4 weeks. We're still gathering intelligence and preparing insertion plans. Blackwood studied her expression. Your grandfather always said that mastery isn't truly tested until it's applied under the most demanding conditions possible. Morgan considered the implications. Her training program had produced results beyond even her expectations. But coordinating 5 operators, each executing at the absolute limits of human capability, represented a challenge of an entirely different magnitude. There's something else you should know, Blackwood added. One of the targets is Ibrahim Khalid. Morgan's expression hardened. Khalid was responsible for the ambush that had first revealed her extraordinary capabilities. The man who had orchestrated the attack that nearly killed her entire patrol. I'll need complete operational autonomy, she said finally, and access to the prototype systems for all 5 operators. Blackwood nodded. Already approved. You have whatever you need. As Morgan left the building, she reflected on how far she had come from that day in the desert when 89 hostiles had her unit cornered. The Barrett .50 caliber had changed everything then, not just saving lives, but revealing a capability that had been hidden in plain sight. Now she stood at the threshold of something even more significant. Not just demonstrating what one exceptional operator could achieve, but creating a framework that could transform the very nature of precision operations. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. The true measure of mastery isn't what you can do, it's what you can teach others to do. As the sun set over the horizon, Morgan Reid realized that her journey had come full circle. She had progressed from student to master, from operator to visionary. And in 4 weeks, she would lead a team of extraordinary individuals to demonstrate capabilities that would redefine what was possible in modern warfare. The Barrett had been the catalyst, but the transformation it had sparked was just beginning. The true legacy of her grandfather's work, and her own, was only now beginning to unfold. The scorching desert sun beat down mercilessly as Staff Sergeant Morgan Reid wiped sweat from her brow, peering through her scope at the distant ridgeline. 89 hostile combatants had her unit pinned down in what was supposed to be a routine patrol, now turned into a desperate fight for survival. The Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle beside her represented their last hope, a weapon she'd spent years mastering, though none of her squad knew the full extent of her training or the legendary mentor who had shaped her into the warrior they were about to witness. The mountain air bit cold and thin as Morgan Reid surveyed the rugged terrain through her advanced thermal imaging system. Dawn was still hours away, but her team had been in position since midnight, meticulously preparing for what military historians would later call Operation Vanishing Point, the most ambitious precision strike ever attempted. 5 operators, 5 targets, 5 synchronized shots at extreme distances through complex environmental conditions. The mission parameters exceeded what military doctrine considered possible, but Morgan's team wasn't bound by conventional limitations. They had transcended them. Final equipment check. Morgan's voice transmitted through encrypted communication channels to her team members, each positioned at precisely calculated locations across the mountainous border region. Cortez in position. Systems green. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Cortez lay prone on a narrow ledge 100 meters from her designated target, a terrorist financier whose banking network had funded attacks across 3 continents. Turner ready. Perfect conditions. Master Sergeant Jackson Turner had established his firing position in an abandoned shepherd's hut 400 meters from his target, the operational planner responsible for coordinating attacks on civilian infrastructure. Chen on station. Calculations complete. Sergeant First Class Michael Chen had concealed himself in dense vegetation overlooking a valley where his target, the network's communications specialist, would appear in exactly 17 minutes. Rodriguez set. Clear sight line established. Captain Rodriguez's position offered the closest shot at 900 meters, targeting the group's logistics coordinator. Morgan acknowledged each confirmation as she finalized her own preparations. Her target, Ibrahim Khalid, represented both a strategic priority and a personal reckoning, the architect of countless attacks, including the ambush that had nearly killed her original patrol. Unlike conventional operations where targets were often unaware of the threat until it was too late, Khalid operated with paranoid security protocols. He never appeared in open areas, maintained minimal digital footprint, and surrounded himself with multiple security cordons. His compound had been specifically designed to make long-range interdiction impossible, situated in a valley with restricted sightlines, protected by mountains on 3 sides, and deliberately positioned beyond the effective range of conventional sniper systems. What Khalid couldn't have anticipated was that the definition of effective range had fundamentally changed. Morgan's position atop a distant mountain peak placed her 200 meters from the target, a distance that military doctrine classified as beyond maximum effective range for any man-portable weapon system. The shot would require a bullet to travel over 2 miles, remaining in flight for nearly 7 seconds, during which it would be affected by multiple wind conditions, temperature gradients, and the Coriolis effect of the Earth's rotation. By conventional standards, success was mathematically impossible. But Morgan Reid had spent a lifetime redefining the boundaries of possible. Intelligence confirms all targets on schedule. Blackwood's voice came through the secure communication channel from the operations command center, hundreds of miles away. Satellite thermal imagery shows security patterns consistent with pre-mission intelligence. "You are green for synchronization," Morgan acknowledged and addressed her team. "Initiate pre-shot protocols. Physiological alignment in 3 minutes." Each operator began the specialized breathing techniques that would synchronize their bodily functions, slowing heart rates, optimizing oxygen utilization, and entering the heightened awareness state that Morgan had taught them. These weren't just technical preparations, but a fundamental realignment of consciousness itself, accessing what her grandfather had called the perfect shot mind. "I want you to understand something," Morgan said, her voice calm and centered as her team prepared. "What we're about to do isn't just about eliminating 5 threats. It's about demonstrating that human potential extends far beyond artificial limitations. Every impossible achievement begins with someone willing to challenge established boundaries." Through her scope, Morgan could see the compound where Khalid was scheduled to appear in exactly 12 minutes. The environmental conditions were exactly as challenging as intelligence had predicted. Variable mountain winds, rapidly changing temperature gradients as dawn approached, and humidity fluctuations that would affect ballistic performance in complex ways. Synchronization complete, Morgan announced after verifying that all team members had achieved the optimal physiological state. Transition to final ballistic calculations. Each operator began processing the thousands of variables that would determine success or failure, not through conscious mathematics, but through the integrated awareness that Morgan had trained them to access. They weren't calculating trajectories, they were perceiving them as intuitive realities. 7 minutes to target appearance. Blackwood updated. Satellite confirms security sweep in progress. Standard protocol suggests targets will emerge for morning briefing at 0527 hours. Morgan used these final minutes to enter the deepest level of focused awareness, a state where conscious thought gave way to perfect integration with the environment, the weapon, and the physics governing the bullet's journey. Her grandfather had described it as becoming the shot, a condition where the distinction between shooter, weapon, and trajectory dissolved into unified action. Targets emerging. Blackwood's voice registered distantly in Morgan's awareness. Confirm visual acquisition. One by one, her team members confirmed visual contact with their assigned targets. Morgan's scope revealed Ibrahim Khalid stepping into the compound's central courtyard, surrounded by security personnel. At this distance, most operators would see only a tiny, indistinct figure. Through her specialized optics and trained perception, Morgan could discern precise details: the way he carried himself, the positioning of his security team, even the subtle indicators of his habitual vigilance. All targets confirmed. Morgan announced, "Prepare for synchronized execution on my mark." This was the moment everything had built toward, not just the weeks of mission preparation, but the years of training, the lifetime of dedication to mastering skills that existed at the very edge of human capability. 5 impossible shots, taken simultaneously, would eliminate a terrorist network that had believed itself beyond reach. 3. Morgan began the countdown, her voice perfectly steady. 2. Each team member made final microscopic adjustments, accounting for last-second environmental changes. 1. Time seemed to slow as they entered the perfect execution state. Consciousness expanded yet precisely focused. Execute. 5 weapons fired in perfect synchronization across miles of mountain terrain. 5 bullets began journeys that defied conventional possibility, arcing through space on trajectories calculated with superhuman precision. In the command center, Blackwood and his team watched through live satellite feeds as the operation unfolded. The silence was absolute, as they waited the agonizing seconds for physics to complete what human skill had initiated. Then, confirmation began streaming in through multiple intelligence channels. 5 targets eliminated simultaneously with single shots of unprecedented precision. An entire network's leadership structure had vanished in a moment of perfect execution. All targets confirmed, Blackwood announced, unable to keep the awe from his voice. Operation Vanishing Point complete. Begin extraction protocols. As Morgan began methodically breaking down her equipment, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. Her grandfather had spent his life pushing beyond established limitations, believing that human potential remained largely untapped. Today, she and her team had vindicated that belief in the most dramatic fashion possible. But more important than the operation itself was what it represented. A fundamental shift in understanding what skilled human operators could achieve with proper selection, training, and mindset. The barriers that had once seemed fixed by physics and human limitation had been revealed as largely psychological and institutional. 3 days later, Morgan stood before the Joint Special Operations Command leadership as they reviewed the operation's results. The technical data was unprecedented: shot distances, accuracy levels, and synchronized execution that redefined precision operations. Staff Sergeant Reid. General Maxwell began. The success of Operation Vanishing Point has significant strategic implications. Your team accomplished what our doctrine classified as theoretically impossible. Morgan remained composed, her posture reflecting the same disciplined precision that characterized everything she did. Sir, what we demonstrated isn't limited to these 5 operators or this specific mission profile. The methodologies can be systematized and taught to properly selected candidates. That's precisely what we want to discuss, the general continued. We're establishing a dedicated facility, the Advanced Precision Operations Center. You're being promoted to captain and appointed as its commanding officer, with full authority to implement your training methodologies on a larger scale. Morgan had anticipated something along these lines, but the scope exceeded her expectations. Sir, scaling these capabilities will require significant resources and institutional flexibility. Some of our methods diverge considerably from conventional approaches. You've earned that flexibility, Captain Reid, the general replied. Your grandfather began this journey. You've validated his vision. Now we want you to build on that foundation. As the briefing concluded, Blackwood approached Morgan privately. William would be proud, he said quietly, not just of what you accomplished, but of how you've expanded on his work. Morgan nodded, allowing herself a rare smile. He always said the true test of mastery isn't what you can do yourself, it's what you can enable others to achieve. 2 weeks later, Morgan stood before a vastly expanded training facility constructed according to her specifications. The first class of 30 candidates, selected through the specialized assessment protocols she had developed, watched attentively as she addressed them. Each of you has demonstrated exceptional potential, she began. But potential means nothing without proper development. What you'll learn here goes beyond conventional marksmanship or even specialized sniper training. We're going to fundamentally transform your understanding of what's possible. Among the candidates, Morgan had already identified several with extraordinary promise. individuals whose natural aptitudes mirrored those of her original team. But she'd also recognized something her grandfather had always emphasized. Exceptional performance wasn't just about natural talent or technical training. It was about the mindset that made transcendent achievement possible. The Barrett .50 caliber changed everything for me, she continued, gesturing to the weapon displayed at the front of the room. Not because of its technical capabilities, but because it forced me to confront artificial limitations I had accepted without question. Each of you will find your own catalyst, the challenge that reveals your true potential. As Morgan outlined the program that would transform these promising candidates into operators capable of achievements currently considered impossible, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a young girl receiving her grandfather's specialized training, to a soldier hiding her true capabilities, to the commander of a program that would redefine operational possibilities. Each step had built upon the last, creating a legacy that extended far beyond her individual achievements. The Barrett had been the instrument that revealed her extraordinary capabilities to the world. But the true catalyst had been her willingness to challenge conventional wisdom about what was possible, a mindset she was now positioned to instill in generations of operators to come. 6 months later, Morgan observed as her first class of graduates demonstrated capabilities that would have seemed miraculous before her training program. Shots at distances previously considered theoretical rather than practical. Environmental adaptation that bordered on preternatural. Integration of mind, body, and physics that transformed marksmanship from a technical skill into an art form. Lieutenant Commander Cortez, now serving as Morgan's chief instructor, joined her on the observation platform. "The progress is remarkable," she noted. "Several candidates are already approaching the performance levels our original team demonstrated during Operation Vanishing Point." Morgan nodded, watching as a young operator executed a perfect shot sequence under conditions specifically designed to make success impossible by conventional standards. They're surpassing expectations because they've stopped accepting artificial limitations. Once you remove the psychological barriers, physical capabilities expand dramatically. "It's changing everything," Cortez added. "Not just operational parameters, but the entire strategic calculus. The ability to conduct precision interdiction at these distances transforms how we approach high-value target operations, force protection, even conventional warfare." Morgan smiled slightly. "My grandfather used to say that true revolution doesn't come from new technology, but from new thinking about what's possible with existing tools." As the demonstration concluded, Morgan addressed the graduating class one final time before they deployed to their specialized assignments across the operational spectrum. "What you've accomplished here isn't just about marksmanship or even about military capability," she told them. "It's about the human potential that exists beyond accepted limitations. You've demonstrated that boundaries we accept as fixed are often just psychological constructs waiting to be transcended." She gestured toward the Barrett rifles they had mastered during their training. "These weapons didn't make you exceptional. They merely revealed the exceptional capabilities that already existed within you. Capabilities that were waiting to be unlocked through proper training, mindset, and integration." As the graduates departed for assignments that would put their unprecedented skills to use protecting innocent lives and eliminating threats beyond the reach of conventional capabilities, Morgan found herself reflecting on the full circle of her journey. The desert ambush that had forced her to reveal her true capabilities had seemed like an ending at the time, the conclusion of her attempt to prove herself through conventional channels. Instead, it had been the beginning of something far more significant, a fundamental transformation in understanding what skilled human operators could achieve. In her office later that evening, Morgan reviewed applications for the next class of candidates while finalizing curriculum adjustments based on data from the first cohort. A photograph on her desk showed her grandfather in his prime, Barrett rifle at his side, the same quiet confidence in his eyes that Morgan now carried. Beside it sat a commendation for Operation Vanishing Point, the mission that had demonstrated the full potential of her training program. 5 impossible shots, 5 simultaneous eliminations, 5 operators executing at the absolute edge of human capability. The Barrett .50 caliber had changed everything that day in the desert, when 89 hostiles had her unit cornered. But the true transformation had come from within, from the willingness to challenge accepted limitations and reveal capabilities that had always existed, waiting to be unlocked. As she reviewed the profiles of future candidates who would continue expanding the boundaries of possible, Morgan remembered her grandfather's favorite quote, The only true limitations are those we accept without question. The Barrett had been the catalyst, but the legacy it had sparked would continue transforming operational possibilities for generations to come, a legacy of excellence, innovation, and the relentless pursuit of human potential beyond conventional limitations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.